It was a morning like any other. Nothing unusual. No thunder in the sky, no strange premonitions, just the hum of city life in Mumbai and a woman, Bhumi Chauhan, running late for a flight. She had overslept by nearly 30 minutes. The alarm had gone off, but somehow she had drifted back to sleep. She would later say something about that sleep felt too heavy, almost unnatural, like time itself had slowed her down. Frantic and half-dressed, she threw on the first clothes she could find, zipped up her suitcase with shaking hands, and bolted out the door. The taxi ride to Chhatrapati Shivaji Airport was a blur. Horns blaring, people shouting, her hands trembling as she checked the time again and again. Flight AI 231 to London was her lifeline. She had a crucial meeting scheduled, a job opportunity she had dreamed about for years. Missing this flight wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a disaster. She arrived at the terminal barely 10 minutes before departure. Out of breath, drenched in sweat, and clutching her passport like a lifeline, Bhumi sprinted to the check-in desk. "Please," she begged, "I have to get on that plane." But the gate had closed, just 2 minutes earlier. The staff was firm. Protocol. The aircraft was already taxiing toward the runway. No exceptions. She collapsed into a nearby seat, a storm of emotion rising in her chest. Anger, embarrassment, disappointment. She wanted to scream, to cry, to curse the universe for this cruel twist of fate. As she sat there, staring blankly at the departure screen, she had no idea that missing that flight would become the most important moment of her life. Exactly 78 minutes after takeoff, somewhere over the mountains of Himachal Pradesh, Air India Flight 231 vanished from radar. No distress call, no emergency signal, just gone. Hours later, the world would learn the grim truth. Wreckage scattered across a remote mountainside. No survivors. 241 lives extinguished in silence. Air India Flight 231 took off from Mumbai's Chhatrapati Shivaji International Airport at exactly 8:04 a.m. It was a picture-perfect morning. The sky above was a pale blue canvas, the air smooth, visibility crystal clear. Not a single warning light flickered, not a single system gave pause. In the cabin, the atmosphere was relaxed. Business travelers reviewed presentations. A young couple whispered excitedly about their honeymoon in London. An elderly woman clutched her rosary, praying softly in the window seat. Children laughed, headphones on, lost in cartoons. By all appearances, it was just another safe, uneventful flight across the continent. Flight 231 climbed steadily, cruising at 36,000 feet as it crossed over central India. No turbulence, no irregularities. The cockpit crew, both seasoned pilots with thousands of logged hours, made their routine check-ins with air traffic control. Everything was smooth, everything was fine, until it wasn't. At exactly 9:22 a.m., 78 minutes after departure, Flight 231 went silent. No distress signal, no emergency transmission. The aircraft simply vanished from radar, mid-air, as if swallowed whole by the sky. Controllers at Mumbai's airspace tower blinked, confused. They checked systems, repeated hails, no response. The flight that had just been a blinking green dot was gone. Within minutes, alarms were raised. Protocols kicked in. The Indian Air Force was notified. Civil aviation authorities scrambled emergency response teams. A massive search effort was launched, stretching across the northern regions of India, covering jungles, valleys, and the steep, snow-draped ridges of Himachal Pradesh. For hours, nothing. The world held its breath. Families crowded around television screens, clutching photographs, praying for a miracle. But as dusk settled over the Himalayas, the truth began to take shape. A reconnaissance helicopter spotted glints of metal on a rugged mountainside near Lahaul Spiti. It was wreckage. The debris was scattered over several kilometers. Torn seats, burnt luggage, fragments of fuselage twisted like ribbon, charred metal pieces embedded in the rock. No black box had yet been recovered. No bodies were intact. And no survivors were found. The death toll, 241 souls. All gone. It was one of the worst aviation disasters in recent Indian history. And yet the mystery surrounding it ran deeper than most. There had been no warning, no mechanical failure logged, no communication from the cockpit to indicate something was wrong. The weather was stable, the pilots experienced, the plane relatively new, and yet it had fallen, silently, completely, into the arms of the mountains. In the days that followed, investigators searched desperately for answers. But for the families, For the country, and for Bhumi Chauhan, the woman who was supposed to be on that plane, the only answer that seemed to make any sense was that something greater had intervened. Something no one could explain. When Bhumi Chauhan first saw the news alert pop up on her phone, her hands were still shaking from the rush of the morning. Breaking, Air India Flight 231 missing. At first it didn't register. She blinked at the screen trying to process the words. The flight number. Her flight. The one she had begged to board just hours earlier. The one she had missed by 2 minutes. The one she'd cried over in the airport lounge, humiliated and angry. Her blood ran cold. She opened her news app, eyes darting across headlines. Contact lost at 9:22 a.m. Search teams deployed. 241 feared dead. And right there, in a blurry photo released from the original passenger manifest, was her name. Bhumi Chauhan, listed as one of the confirmed passengers presumed dead. Her phone buzzed non-stop. 52 missed calls, dozens of messages flooding in, panicked, frantic, some already mourning. Then the phone rang again. This time she answered. It was her mother. There was no hello, just a scream, raw, primal, terrified. Bhumi? Oh my God, you were supposed to be on that plane. Bhumi tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her throat was tight, her chest hollow. She sank to the floor of the terminal, tears falling freely as her mother sobbed on the other end of the line. Strangers turned to look. A woman gasping for air, shaking violently, whispering the same sentence over and over. I should have been on that plane. I should have been on that plane. The weight of it hit her like a tidal wave. The faces of the people she'd stood in line with that morning flashed through her mind. The man with the silver briefcase, the young woman with headphones, a child holding a stuffed giraffe. All gone, and yet she was still here. Alive. Breathing. Why? That night, Bhumi checked into a nearby hotel, but she didn't sleep. She couldn't. She lay on the bed in total darkness, eyes wide, heart pounding, the silence louder than any noise she had ever heard. Around 2 a.m. she sat up and whispered, "Why me?" She repeated it like a prayer, over and over. And then, something strange. She would later describe it not as a sound but a presence, like a warmth that settled over her shoulders, a stillness that felt alive, a moment so quiet and sacred it almost frightened her. She said it felt like a force, divine, powerful, unseen, was in that room with her, not comforting, not speaking, just there, watching, waiting. It was in that moment Bhumi realized this wasn't chance. This wasn't luck. She hadn't just missed a flight. She had been spared, pulled out, protected, by something she couldn't name, couldn't understand, but could no longer deny. From that night forward, she carried one truth in her soul. She was supposed to die that day, but someone, had other plans. In the weeks that followed the crash, Bhumi Chauhan remained silent about one detail. A detail so subtle, so strange, she wasn't sure anyone would believe her. But as the news faded from the headlines and the interviews stopped, she finally opened up to a close friend, and what she said would send chills down their spine. That morning, Bhumi whispered, before everything happened, I heard something. She paused, eyes distant. It was a voice. Not loud, not like someone speaking in the room, but inside me. Soft, calm, a whisper in my mind. It said, slow down. At first, she brushed it off. She thought it was her own exhaustion. She'd been working late, barely sleeping. Maybe it was just stress playing tricks. But the voice had been clear, gentle but deliberate. Slow down. She remembered standing by her bedroom mirror, keys in hand, ready to run. And for some reason she had paused. Just long enough to forget her phone, to go back and look for it. Just long enough to waste the exact 2 minutes that would cause her to miss the flight. At the time she was annoyed, frustrated. But now, she wondered, was it coincidence? Or something more? She replayed it again and again in her head. Those words, that moment. She had lived her whole life believing in God, but never had she felt something so personal, so specific. It wasn't my voice, she later said. It didn't feel like my thought. It felt outside of me. Like something was telling me to stop, holding me back, buying me time. She had never heard anything like it before, and she hasn't heard it since. Some call it intuition, others say coincidence. But Bhumi doesn't hesitate anymore. She calls it what she believes it was, the voice of God. And in that moment she began to realize her survival wasn't just an accident, it was a message. And the voice was only the beginning. Bhumi Chauhan found herself staring at the ceiling night after night, eyes wide open, soul heavy. The silence of survival is not peace. It's a weight, and it presses differently when you know your name was on the list of the dead. Sleep didn't come. When it did, it brought nightmares, burning metal, crying children, seat numbers echoing in the dark. She began to obsess over the details. She couldn't stop. She downloaded every news article, studied every name released by the airline. One by one, she looked them up. Passenger profiles, social media, family tributes. She saw faces, lives, dreams. A 9-year-old boy traveling to London to visit his grandmother for the first time. A young woman with a scholarship to Oxford. A newlywed couple on their honeymoon, married just 5 days earlier. A father who had promised to be home in time for his daughter's piano recital. They were real. And they were gone. And she was still here. It haunted her. She couldn't explain it to friends. They told her she was blessed, lucky, chosen. But Bhumi didn't feel chosen. She felt cursed. Why them? She asked herself over and over. Why not me? What made her life more valuable? What made her so different that some unseen hand had reached down and plucked her out of the jaws of death? The world saw her as the miracle survivor, but inside, she was breaking. Alone in her apartment, surrounded by flickering candles and silent prayer, she would whisper into the air, "God, why did you save me?" No answer came, and yet she felt something, like a weight shifting, a purpose forming, a fire beginning to burn beneath the grief. If I was spared, she thought, then it must be for something. But what? I kept asking, she later told a reporter, voice shaking, "What am I supposed to do with this second chance? What do you want from me?" The answer wouldn't come quickly, but from that moment on, Bhumi Chauhan knew this. She couldn't return to her old life, because the woman who missed that flight had died too, and the one left behind had work to do. As the dust settled over the tragedy of Air India Flight 231, and the nation mourned its dead, investigators began assembling the full passenger manifest, confirming identities, contacting families, and piecing together the last movements of the flight. But as they worked, something unexpected emerged, something strange. Bhumi Chauhan had not been the only one who missed the flight. In a chilling twist, it was revealed that 3 passengers, all confirmed ticket holders, had never boarded the aircraft. Their reasons? Different. Their outcomes? Identical. The second was a businessman from Delhi, scheduled to connect through Mumbai. He canceled just hours before departure, claiming he had a bad feeling. No logical reason. No emergency, just a sense that he needed to reschedule. He later told reporters, "It was like something in my gut told me, don't go. I've never canceled a flight last minute like that before." The third was a 23-year-old student en route to study abroad. He had been packed and ready but overslept, not by 5 minutes, not by 10, but by almost 2 hours, despite setting 3 alarms. "I still don't understand it," he said in a TV interview, staring into the camera. "I've never missed a flight in my life. I went to bed early. Everything was set. I just didn't wake up." Each of them, in isolation, could be dismissed. Coincidence, luck, human error. But together, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Each of the 3 survivors would go on to describe something peculiar. A strange delay, something just slightly off, a forgotten passport, a misplaced key, an inexplicable pause. Like the universe had put a hand on their shoulder and whispered, "Wait." When investigators looked deeper, they found no connection between the 3. Different ages, backgrounds, occupations. They didn't know one another. They weren't seated together. And yet, all 3 had walked away from what should have been certain death, and none of them could explain it. "I don't talk about it much anymore," the student later confessed, "because every time I do, I get this feeling, like I was being watched that day, like something was working behind the scenes." For Bhumi Chauhan, this revelation was both comforting and unsettling. She wasn't alone. Others had been pulled from the jaws of fate too. But the bigger question remained, why us? Was it just statistical fluke? Or was someone, selecting who would live and who wouldn't? In the weeks after the crash of Air India Flight 231, the world held its breath, waiting for answers. News channels ran 24-hour coverage. Families lined up at airports with photos of their loved ones, clinging to hope. But hope soon gave way to anger and confusion, because no matter how deep investigators dug, they found nothing. The plane had taken off under perfect weather conditions. Visibility was crystal clear. No storms, no lightning, no turbulence. The black box was recovered intact, but it revealed no distress call, no warning, no final words from the cockpit. Air India, alongside India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation, launched a full-scale inquiry. Dozens of engineers pored over maintenance records. Every inch of wreckage was combed through. Experts from around the globe were brought in. Boeing sent technicians. The Aviation Ministry hired independent forensic analysts. They tested for mechanical failure, pilot error, fuel contamination, even electrical sabotage. But time and time again, the same conclusion. Nothing made sense. The engines had been functioning perfectly. The pilot was experienced, decorated, and sober. The flight path was routine. No signals were jammed, no radar anomalies. And most haunting of all, the final 30 seconds of the cockpit voice recorder were silent. No panic, no mayday, just static. Terrorism was ruled out almost immediately. No claims of responsibility, no suspicious baggage, no known threats. The passenger list turned up clean. The crash site showed no sign of an explosion. It was as if the plane had simply fallen out of the sky, and no one could explain why. As the weeks turned to months, public frustration boiled over. Families gathered outside government offices holding candlelight vigils, demanding accountability. "We deserve answers," they cried. But behind closed doors, even top officials admitted it. They had none. That's when the theories began. Some called it divine retribution, God's judgment. One grieving father whispered through tears, "He took them for a reason we'll never understand." Others weren't so spiritual. They believed something was being hidden. Whispers of a cover-up began to spread online. "Something happened on that plane," a retired pilot posted in a now viral video. "Something they're not telling us. Planes don't just drop from the sky without a trace." The official report would eventually list the cause as undetermined, possible structural failure at high altitude. A vague label, a dead end. But for Bhumi Chauhan and the families of the 241 souls lost that day, that answer wasn't enough. It never would be. For weeks, Bhumi Chauhan drifted through the world like a ghost, alive but not truly living. The questions haunted her. The dreams returned nightly. The guilt clung like smoke. But in the quiet spaces of her sorrow, something new began to take shape. It started as a whisper, then a spark, then a vow. "I didn't survive," she said one morning, staring into the mirror, "just to return to my old life." That day, Bhumi made a decision. If God had spared her life, she would not waste a single breath of it. She founded Wings of Mercy, a nonprofit dedicated to flight safety awareness, emotional trauma support, and rapid crisis response for aviation victims and their families. What began as a small effort from her living room grew quickly. Her story caught national attention. Donations poured in, volunteers joined, survivors from other crashes reached out, and Bhumi, once just another name on a boarding pass, became something else. A voice for the voiceless. But her mission didn't stop with policy or programs. She did something most couldn't bear to do. She visited the families. One by one, Bhumi traveled across cities and villages, knocking on the doors of the people whose lives had been shattered by the crash. She sat on living room floors beside grieving mothers. She held the hands of children too young to understand where their fathers had gone. She cried with widows. She listened. She prayed. At every doorstep she introduced herself the same way. "I was supposed to be on that flight." Some wept, some embraced her, some just stared, silently, trying to understand how she had been spared when their loved one had not. Bhumi never offered answers, because she didn't have them. What she offered was presence, compassion, the promise that they were not forgotten. "I don't believe I was saved just to live," Bhumi later told a crowd at a memorial gathering. "I believe I was saved to serve. God gave me life, now I have to live it for others." And she meant it. In a world full of headlines that fade, Bhumi's name stayed. But not because she survived a tragedy, because she transformed it. In the months that followed the crash, Bhumi Chauhan became a national symbol. Newspapers called her the girl who cheated death. Talk shows invited her to speak. Strangers stopped her on the street, some weeping, others just needing to touch her hand. She was living proof that miracles existed. But not everyone saw it that way. Behind the headlines and camera lights, a quieter, darker storm was brewing. As the pain of loss deepened for the families of the victims, so did a bitter question that echoed in more than one home. Why Bhumi? Why her? And not my son? Not my daughter? Some whispered it in grief. Others screamed it in rage. One mother stood at a candlelight vigil and said, "I'm happy she lived, but my daughter was a better person. She volunteered, she prayed. Why didn't God save her?" Anonymous messages began showing up in Bhumi's inbox. "You should have been on that plane. Stop pretending you were chosen. God didn't save you, He just forgot you." Some even went further. A threatening letter was mailed to her office. Police were called. Security was tightened, but Bhumi refused to stop her work. Still, the hatred shook her, not because she feared for her life, but because she understood their pain. She felt it. She knew what it meant to wake up one day and discover the world had shattered. She knew what it meant to scream at God in the dark. But being a survivor didn't mean she had all the answers. It meant she carried questions too, just different ones. One night, after receiving a particularly cruel email calling her a fraud miracle, Bhumi sat alone on her balcony, gripping her cross, staring up at the stars. And for the first time since the crash, she cried. Not out of fear or guilt, but because of the unbearable weight of being spared. She whispered into the night, "God, if this is what you saved me for, give me the strength to carry it." And somehow, in that silence, she found peace. Later, when asked how she stayed so strong in the face of such anger, Bhumi didn't flinch. "God doesn't save the ones who deserve it," she said quietly. "He saves the ones He plans to use." It wasn't arrogance, it was surrender. She didn't claim to be special, she only claimed to be willing. And in that, Bhumi found a faith stronger than miracles, a faith that could stand in the fire and still say thank you. 10 years had passed, a decade since Air India Flight 231 vanished from the sky and left 241 families forever changed. A decade since Bhumi Chauhan, by some twist of time, fate, or divine intervention, missed the flight that should have ended her life. And now she stood once more at the memorial built in its memory, wind brushing gently through her hair, a soft drizzle falling like heaven itself was mourning. In her hands, she held 241 slender white candles, one for every soul lost that day. She lit them in silence, one by one, whispering names, names she had memorized, names she had carried in her heart like scars. Each flame flickered like a heartbeat, each whisper a prayer. And then, with trembling lips and a voice steady with reverence, she said, "I carry you with me, every day, in every breath I take." The press had gathered nearby, cameras rolling quietly out of respect. Bhumi wasn't there for headlines, but they always found her. 10 years later, she was still a story. Still the miracle girl. A young reporter finally approached, her voice soft, hesitant. "Miss Chauhan, after all this time, after everything, do you still believe it was a miracle?" Bhumi turned slowly toward her. Her face was older now, lined with time, grief, and wisdom, but her eyes were still lit with something almost otherworldly. A fire not dimmed by age or pain. She smiled, not the smile of someone at peace, but of someone who had earned it the hard way. "I don't just believe," she said. "I know, I am the miracle." There was no arrogance in her voice, no drama, just truth, simple, sacred, and unshakable. Behind her, the candles danced in the wind. In the years since the crash, Bhumi had built schools in the names of the children who perished. She had opened trauma centers for aviation survivors. She had testified before governments, pushing for flight safety reform. She had written a book not about how she survived, but why she kept going. She never remarried, never returned to corporate life. She dedicated herself wholly to the lives that ended the day hers continued. And every year on the anniversary, she returned here, to this place, these names, this ground where the invisible weight of heaven and history pressed into the earth. People often said Bhumi was lucky, but she never used that word. "This wasn't luck," she once told a crowd. "This was purpose disguised as pain." And so the woman who lived did more than survive. She redeemed her survival. She made it holy. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not that you're spared, it's what you choose to become after.